Time being 11:44 a.m. on December 22nd, 2021, I'd like to call this meeting to order of Kane County's American Rescue Plan Committee. And we are doing things a little slightly different today. Our assistant, Jenny Smith, she's got a few sniffly noses and sore throats in her house. So out of abundance of caution, she is working with us remote today on Zoom. So Jenny, could you please call the roll for attendance?
Bates.
Here.
Brown.
Brown here.
Braz.
Braz here.
Gums.
Gums here.
Kenyon.
Here.
Leonard.
Leonard here.
Martin.
Martin present.
Molina.
Molina present.
Strothman.
Strathman here.
Tepe.
Tepe here.
And Sanchez.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum. Would someone please ask for unanimous consent to approve the December 8th, 2021 minutes?
Leonard asks for unanimous consent.
Leonard
on
asks
the
for unanimous
minutes from
consent.
last meeting.
No objections. The minutes are approved. Public comments on agenda and non-agenda items. Do we have anyone who would like to speak from the public? Seeing no one here or online, we will move on. Chairman's comments. It's kind of an update meeting today. Not much work right now before the holidays. We've been doing a lot of work leading up to this point, though, and I'd like to take this moment to thank the committee, to thank Mr. Phillips, and as well as our consultant, Ernst & Young, on all the hard work. I'm happy to announce that the online grant application portal for the community support grants, $4 million program we've been talking so much about, is now open.
Yay!
A lot of work went into it, and we got more work to do, but it's a great milestone to have achieved. Now the organizations that we have all intentions of helping are able to apply, and we will begin the process of getting them some money as soon as we can. And so thank you for everyone who's been involved in this, and very happy that we've made it to this point. That being said, I don't have any other comments, so we just have a few things on the agenda today. Mr. Phillips, if you have an update for us.
I do. I don't have much to add or anything other than to reintroduce Gary Burke for Ernst & Young, and he will take the lead here and appropriately give us a demonstration walkthrough from an applicant perspective of the application as it is now live on countyofkane.org. Gary?
Great, thank you very much. It's great to be with the committee today. I'll share my screen to give the committee a demonstration of how the public will view the application. So hopefully you'll be able to see the Kane County page at the moment. There's a link on the page, a prevalent link in the top of the page for the application portal. The narrative describes the $4 million program, and then a link to the portal. Click on the link, it takes you to the welcome page, and you'll notice that the current application that's open is the Community Support Grant Program. So when I click on this, I'll need to log in. I already have an account, so. And then if you don't have an account, it's fairly simple to register and sign in with an account. Oops. So once you enter the application, you'll see the ARPA committee mission statement, and then you go into complete the information that's required in the application. For the committee's benefit, we have to follow a little more rules for the ARPA funding as compared to the CARES Act funding. While doing so, we endeavored to make the applications as user-friendly and require as few data points as required, and also is required for the county's purposes. So it's a fairly straightforward application that you'll see in the demonstration. So I'll put some test information in here so that we can get a sense of what the user will have to do. Organization name, applicant name, I'll put my name in here. Telephone number, primary email contact, The email contact is very important because this is how, through the submittal platform, the applicant will receive updates from the county, again, via the submittal platform. This is the first of 4 eligibility criteria. The 4 criteria were established and resolved by the county board. The first is the organization fully incorporated and operating the 501c as of January 1st, 2019. It's a yes, no answer. If you click yes, you'll be able to move on to the application. If you select no on any of the eligibility criteria, you receive this message to indicate that you are not eligible for this opportunity. And it provides an email address for communication should you feel like you are eligible for the opportunity. So I'll click yes, choose a file to document the belief. I'll put in just a test document. Loads very quickly. Eligibility criteria 2, does the organization deliver services from a facility that's physically located within Kane County? At least one facility in Kane County? The answer is yes. Again, we'll choose a file. The concept here being they can upload any number of documents, but we thought a utility bill, the evidence and address in Kane County would be the most expeditious piece of documentation that's readily available. The third criteria is select the organization's primary mission, provide services and or aid to Kane County residents. So there's 3 prescribed missions that are allowable in the resolution. So if they select any one of these 3, then they move on. If they select other, then they receive the same notification that they're not eligible. If they feel differently, then they may send an email to discuss. So I'll select a food pantry for this case. The fourth and final eligibility criteria is the organization in good standing with all federal, state, and local standards and requirements? Yes, no, and then choose a file to document that you're in good standing. Once you've made it through the 4 eligibility gates, the rest of the application form opens up. The first area to add information is about the organization. So again, we'll say test organization. Required to have a DUNS number, purposes, and then a mailing address. United States. I think I want to go with phone number for the organization. Very straightforward. And then if there's a website, yes or no. If yes, then it asks you to put in the website. Any website will work. This is an important number where we're trying to get some information about, how does this group of organizations serve Kane County? So how many years has this organization been serving Kane County residents? Let's say 5 for this purpose. The next question is critical. This is where they have the opportunity to describe the organization, their primary mission, which ties back to eligibility criteria, and also how they will use the funds to better Kane County. So it offers 2,000 characters for a wide narrative. Description of how the pandemic has impacted your organization. And its narrative limited to 2,000 characters in this case. And then we go in a little more detail about how the organization has impacted Kane County. Where you provide your services? Do you target certain at-risk demographics? How many individuals in the county has the organization supported during 2021? Just using some random information to complete the application. How will the receipt of the grant funds increase the organization's ability to serve individuals in the county? And how does this usage address equality? The next piece is quite important to not only the application, but how the funding amounts will be contemplated and awarded to successful applicants. This is where they need to provide an estimate of the cost they've incurred from March 3rd, 2021 through March 31st, 2024. The resolution calls for allowing grant recipients to use costs going back to March 3rd and also 2 years from the date of the agreement. So right now we're putting the outer end at March 31st, 2024. In this matrix, you can put in any number of expenses. Based on what you've selected, there are maximums. So if you put in more than the maximum grant amount for your provider type, it frankly doesn't do much benefit. So for this case, I'll just put in $100,000 in this case. Utilities, we can put perhaps $5,000 a year. So fairly straightforward data entry. And the system does the math that totals up both by year and then by category. You have the optionality to expand a little bit if you think it's easier. You could expand it here to have a little more space on the screen to look at the different categories and do the data entry. As a reminder, this is in the NOFO, but here, just so there's the avoidance of any ambiguity, we detail not only the categories of the eligible expense, but also some narrative that explains what may be included in those categories. The final question in the application is, do you have any supporting documents you'd like to share? As I mentioned earlier, some of the narrative boxes are limited by character size, some being 2,000 in limit. So to the extent they have a document they'd want to share to provide further information or to better their application, they can do so in any free text form here. So choose the same file. And then finally, the applicant has to certify based on this language that the information is as accurate and complete as possible. And they understand that the terms and conditions are supported by and governed by the federal government, specifically the US Treasury in this case. Once you've selected all the fields, and if I should have noted earlier that any field with a red asterisk is required. So to the extent there's not a information in required field, the application will prompt you to go back and complete that. Click the submit button, and assuming everything's complete, you get a success message that's visible on your screen. You also get an email communication from the King County email address. And then this links you back to your account. You can see the status of your application at any point in time, whether it's submitted in the review process, approved, denied, et cetera. And then we'll use Submittable to help all the other future workflows associated with the grant process. So Mr. Phillips or Mr. Sanchez, anything else you'd like me to cover on the application?
Well, I think the only other thing is there is a confirmation email that the application was received and then that it was with information on appeals process as well. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Second.
Yeah,
Mr.
there
Sanchez, I can pull it up.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I filled this out and I did get a confirmation email, so you're correct on
Excellent,
that.
yeah. Just figured worth seeing it too.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'll pull it up
No
here.
We're going to reject that application.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Sure, Ms. Bates.
It's kind of a comment, and I sent this to you and Mr. Phillips in an email. As I was practicing filling out this application as well, it seemed like the directions were below the box. Is that standard operating procedure? I'd like to see those instructions above the box. It felt a little confusing to me. Maybe I'm easily confused, but I'm not easily confused. So, do you know what I'm talking about, Gary?
I do. I'll come back to your question, but I just want to share the email that comes to the applicant when they do submit an application. It should be visible on the screen for everyone
Yep,
currently.
I can see it.
Okay. So I'll stop my sharing and then address your question. We certainly have flexibility to move the narrative around. We can put anything above a box or below the box. The way that it's currently configured is using the standard submittable forms. And with that standard, if you request for the budget as an example, you put that template in there, and then the software itself puts the description underneath the budget information underneath the matrix. But again, we do have functionality and ability to revise that should that be the will of the committee.
It's just a suggestion. So maybe other people can fill out the form too and see what they think. I think it'd be more clear if the instructions were above the box instead of below.
Mr. Martin?
I'd like to volunteer that this is not a hypothetical anymore. This is on, it's available to the public, and I don't know that it would be prudent to now provide a new iteration of it. You may be right, Mavis, it may be a shortcoming, but having said that, it's out there in the form it is, and it's not a grievous error, and I would just leave it sit rather than appear to be indecisive.
I agree.
Mr. Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would concur with Mr. Martin on that. If I can fill out this application, anybody can. So I think it's just fine the way it is.
Are you sure you want to deny that, Vern?
I'd like to second that motion.
Conclusion.
Mr.
yeah.
Leonard can fill it out. Anybody can.
It's also the industry of forms. He should be pretty good at.
Any other questions or comments on the application portal for the Community Support Grant Program? All right. Thank you, Mr. Burke, for taking us through that and for all your hard work and your team's hard work on helping us get to this point. Very well appreciated.
Mr. Chair, is Gary sticking around?
I believe so. Gary, are you able to hang on for a few more moments?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, the next discussion item, the department requests. Kelly, can you pull that up, please? Yeah. And so this is a document you've all received, and just to see if there's any conversation we'd like to have on it. At this point, we're not at the point of making any decisions on this yet. But as you can see, Jenny was gracious enough to put together this nice presentation for us, so you get an idea. If you could go to the next slide, please. So we did have a revision that went out. There was some information we're waiting to get back from some departments. So the original number was 56 million, but now we're looking at $49 million has been recommended by this committee on the department requests. So just as a concept going forward in our planning, this is a number either we're going to be happy with, or we're going to go through a process to trim that down and bring it to a different number that we're more comfortable with, so that we have resources for other things going forward. Mr. Martin?
I'd like to comment on that point.
Yeah.
As one person on this committee, my attitude is that we hold a fiduciary responsibility to the county, to our elected officials, to our department heads, and to the taxpayers, to make certain that we have utilized as much of these funds as are available and appropriate to the benefit of the county. And when we say, how much are we going to spend? Unless someone can tell me why I'm wrong and convince me that I'm wrong, I've been told I'm wrong many times. By the time if we look at this money, everybody on this committee has met with these department heads and electeds. And they've met with them, they've scrutinized it, and these have been submitted. So these are not numbers that haven't been considered at this point in time. And my thought is, I'd like to know why we shouldn't just simply support all of these activities, perhaps have them reviewed by Ernst & Young to confirm that in fact they comply with the statute. But if it's very difficult for me to reach a point where I can say, well, the county, to the benefit of its citizens and its taxpayers, can use 50 million of these dollars. But I think we ought to give them $40 million and then dole out $10 million to charities. We are very properly having conversations about what do we do for sources of income for the county? How do we balance our budget over the next 4 or 5 years? And to arbitrarily sit here and say, well, they want 50, but what do you think about, let's pay them 35. I find it, I feel very strongly that this 50 million ought to be the priority. Balancing our budget, making certain that we have money in hand to balance our budget and meet pre-existing commitments that we have with these funds. And if somebody could give me a money line, I don't think we've got money left if we do all that to continue this conversation as if we've got tons of discretion. I mean, conceptually, to me, the job is substantially done. We've got half the money. We're going to get more money next year. We don't even have the money this year to exercise this discretion. We've got a $50 million ask, and we've got 53 million bucks in the hopper minus what we've spent. So my personal predisposition or disposition when I look at this is, let's honor the county requests. Let's make certain that we have accommodated potential budgetary needs at least through, pick a period of time, and then see what we've got left. And I'm going to guess, and somebody can prove me wrong, I'm going to guess that we don't have much money left. So I don't want to come back every 2 weeks and listen to groups asking us for money if there's not a realistic expectation that it's going to be there. And I certainly am not supportive of going down the line and saying to the state's attorney, well, I think we're going to cut these 3 programs from you, or from the development department. Well, I think these programs aren't of merit. These were put together by people who, and scrutinized by members of this committee. So it's not like we picked these up in a bucket. These have been well considered to this point. End of rant.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Martin. Mr. Kenyon.
Make that in the form of a motion?
Well, it wouldn't be actionable at this time. We
Can't
wouldn't
do
need
it now?
We could take a consensus of the committee. It would have to be a resolution.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Brown.
Mr. Martin, I'm not going to try to prove you wrong, that's for sure. But because I think I agree with you. But
if you want to grab the low-hanging fruit, you ought to try to prove me wrong.
But I'm going to say this, that I've been meeting quite regularly with Peter and Jarrett in the last couple of weeks. And I think the first thing we need to do, and I know Jarrett has now got this meeting lined up with finance for right after the first of the year. And Jarrett, maybe you should speak more to this than me. But I think the first thing we need to do is realize and understand how much money we do have left. I've asked quite a few members of this committee or this board, how much money do you think we have? And I've gotten answers everywhere from 103 million to none. We've spent a lot of money, and it's been through resolutions, and it's been through budgets, and it's been through many different ways. We've already spent a lot of money. Exactly what that amount of money is, we need that amount to have the discussion you want to have. And I agree with your discussion, but exactly how much money that is at this point, I don't think anybody sitting at this table knows exactly what that is. And that is why Jarrett and Peter are going to meet with finance after the first of the year to get this put together. A couple of the following comments I'd have is going off of the health committee earlier today. I asked about the home contact or the home testing things and how effective the contact tracing is. One of the items that the health department had asked for was $3.7 million for the next 3 years. Is that really a valid number? Because if we don't have to fund that 3.7 for the next 3 years because contact tracing isn't accomplishing anything to the extent that it was 6 months ago, that's a lot of money. So I think, to try to sum this up without getting too far into the details, I think we need to know how much money we have first, and then I'll probably second your motion to move forward with the interdepartment request, because I think, as you said, they're very important requests and they've been vetted out very well. But we got to get a little bit more detail to this before we can go down that road.
And I can speak to that. Just that in our, hold on, just to bring you up to speed. In our conversation, I began with Ernst & Young about what our planning process might look like, and having them assist us in that, because essentially what we want to work towards is an overall budget, something that is reproducible and publicly available, that everyone understands. This is at least what this committee recommends to the full board of how the money should be allocated. Mr. Phillips has worked with Eric Wagner in finance to get to a certain point of understanding. We still had some questions. We brought Ernst & Young in, gave them access to our general ledgers. They made quite a bit, even more sense of it than we were able to, which was a lot. And there still were some questions. So it was obvious that we need more complete coordination with our finance department to be able to understand what everything is in the general ledgers, how they keep track of things, answer all our questions so that we can provide a financial worksheet for this committee and for the full board and the public of exactly how much has been spent to date, how much we have left going forward, and use that as a basis for putting some numbers on buckets for our overall budget. So that meeting is scheduled for January 3rd. It was the soonest we could get in with Mr. Onzik, and that should be a very fruitful conversation. Mr. Tepe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know I was one of the ones that originally said that we should divide up into teams and take a good look at the internal requests. And at the time, I felt that part of the objective would be that we would scrutinize these requests and probably turn down a lot of them. And Ms. Strathman and I were assigned a particular department. And what we did is we went and spent the better part of a day with an expert in that area, got ourselves educated, and then sat down with the department to review those requests. After reviewing those requests, we were so impressed with the thought and the work and the justification that had been put into these requests that we are, I'm sure both, I don't want to speak for her, but I'm going to enthusiastically say we should fund all of them. And those are the ones we moved all of them forward because of that. So I want to very effectively agree with Mr. Martin. I think we need to move ahead with these internal requests as quickly and expeditiously as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Tepe.
Bates,
Hold on.
please.
I have a question from Ms. Molina. Ms. Molina, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Sanchez. I have now two items to discuss. The first one is, have we put together a hazard pay policy for the county employees countywide? One of our asks was for hazard pay, and we didn't completely recommend that at this point because we don't have a hazard pay policy set forth. So I would request that we look into that and make sure that we have something put that covers hazard pay and which county employees are covered under the hazard pay portion of the ARP funds. And the second one is one of the things that Mr. Brown and I went through was from our public health department, and they were requesting a mobile unit to provide vaccinations. And I think that is a very important request. And I think that's something that we need to move forward as soon as possible so that we're able to get to the areas where people aren't able to get to a max vax site, but are requesting to be vaccinated. So that's my push to hopefully put that on the agenda as soon as possible, is to fund that mobile unit, because it's going to take a while to move forward so that they can actually get it delivered. But so those are my two things. One is the hazard pay and the second is that mobile vax unit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Molina. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Tepe for suggesting these two-person groups to go out and talk to the internal request. I think it was very eye-opening and beneficial to everyone. And with the amounts that were recommended by these 5 committees of a little over $49 million, if we would approve that, and we've taken ARPA funds for the 22 budget, we're also going to have to take more ARPA funds for the 23 budget. And we have $4 million allocated already to outside 501c programs. And then we have expenses. Those allocations alone, assuming those are all reasonably legitimate and will be approved, comes to about $81 million of the $103 million. And as Mr. Martin suggested, we've only received half of that, 51.5 million, and we've already got an allocation about 60% higher than that. But I would like to point out too, on the internal request, I think it was really well handled in that the recommendations that came in were only a little over 70% of what was requested. So it wasn't like everybody just carte blanche said, yeah, it's great, let's do it. I think these were reasonable and considered decisions made by each and every committee. So I would just like to say that until we get a defined number, like Mr. Brown had suggested, and know where we're at, and then look forward, realizing there are going to be other expenses that are going to come up that we don't even know about, and allocating for that. I don't even want to consider any more outside sources until we get these numbers. I mean, I think we're just wasting our time talking about it.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. Mr. Brown?
Yeah,
Yates, please.
to Bill's point, I mean, or maybe back to my point, yeah, there's going to be a lot of costs to come yet. You know, we've recently approved 2 resolutions, one for an additional state's attorney and one for an accountant, to fund them for the next 4 years. So we've got that coming at us. We've got a consultant cost coming at us. We've got maybe more Kane Vac site costs coming at us. There has to be, not only is Jarrett gonna, Jarrett, and I hate to speak for you, but I guess I will. Jarrett gonna be working to, and Peter gonna be working to put together what we have spent, but also a projection of items like that. So we really do know how much money we have left.
And to your point, Mr. Leonard, it is a very important part of this conversation to acknowledge the county board of itself determined for next year's budget to take some of the ARPA funds. So the sooner we're able to come up with at least a conceptual budget that we all approve and vote upon to have in the conversation with the full county board about how these monies should be spent, or we would like them to be spent, it's very important. And I agree. We're not at that point yet to be able to talk about it until we have a chart that shows us exactly where we're at financially. It's all just theoretical.
Yates, please.
Bates, you've been waiting. Go ahead.
I agree basically with everything that's been said. I have one question, one concern, and that's that we have gotten these very thoughtful requests from our internal directors, and I'm just wondering if we have completely vetted all of these requests. I sat down with Roger and Fonstock, and we decided that we could shave a couple million, maybe 2.5 million off of their requests. Maybe turning some, just reconsidering some of the requests. And I'm wondering if we've gone through all of these requests yet with a sharpened pencil to make sure that if anything could be reduced.
Well, I think that the 2-person duos did their due diligence on that. And to that point, any other vetting of these applications we would want to be done, this committee would have to decide upon. Before we do any planning, there is a consideration that maybe we would want Ernst & Young to look at all these departmental requests and find out, do any of them have federal funding available to handle those requests out there? So then those can actually be taken off of this list that would come ideally from the ARPA funds. So that's something this committee could make the decision on as well before we get into our planning process. Mr. Shepro.
I agree with the comments that Mr. Brown made here and the earlier meeting about the contact tracing, but my understanding is that we don't have a choice, that the state Department of Public Health has the right to tell us we have to do it, even if it might be a waste of money. And I wondered if I'm right about that.
We are required to do contact tracing right now. There is no definite deadline of when that's going to end. I've heard talk that maybe it'll go through 2022. We don't know. Do you guys have any, Laura, do you have any more detailed information on when contact tracing might end or the need for it?
No, the simple answer is no, but I think we can ask the people who are more directly involved at the health department in that and bring more information back to the group.
Yeah, last I knew, they're pivoting to how they're going to message contact tracing into 2022, but no discussion of an end date for that requirement.
And just
of
to
public health
follow up, I
departments.
know sometimes when there's a mandate, they tell you you have to do it, but they don't tell you how or how much.
Mhm.
Or how
But it
long.
doesn't seem like here, you either do it or you don't. I don't think you can ask every other person or something.
The requirements we're under is that we have to contact positive cases within 48 hours, 100% of positive cases within 48 hours.
I recall a discussion during the CARES Act committee,
Mhm.
where I think the previous executive director sort of came in, said, this is how much I need for this. And she was very nice about it, but it was like, you have to give it to me. And I gather that's still the case unless there's a change in state or federal policy.
Nothing has changed yet. Madam Chair, did you have a?
I agree with this conversation about the contact tracing. I think it's important that because money is so finite and it's such a significant amount of money. I'm not disagreeing with potential need, but with the home testing, and if you don't feel you're really ill and you find out that you have COVID and you're being home tested, and you stay home with your aspirin or whatnot and you get better. I mean, not everybody, in my understanding, in this new world is going to be contacting the health department and letting them know that they have COVID. But COVID is going to continue to be rampant because not all cases of COVID are serious enough to go to the hospital. Thank goodness.
Most are not.
Most, yeah, most are not. Most are not. So for that amount of money, I think it should require careful investigation, and that's my opinion.
If I had to predict, once the state says we don't have to do it, this board will probably decide not to. So, Mr. Martin.
I kind of gather that there's a consensus that we need to know numbers.
Right.
And the meeting, that you say there's a meeting on January 3rd.
Yes.
So we have a meeting scheduled for January 5th, which I presume is going to be non-productive because they will not have yet produced whatever it is they're supposed to refine after January 3rd. I would like, so that we're not sitting here wasting time and psyche, I'd like to not have more meetings until we have those numbers and until our portal is closed on the existing grants. Then we kind of all have agreed to a course of action and we can move ahead. But it seems to me that aren't those the next task? I don't want to be.
Well, I think the portal, the amount for that has already been allocated and decided upon $4 million.
Well, I mean, I'm assuming we're going to have more applications than we have money
Mhm.
in there. So there'll have to be some committee decision as to what we're going to recommend to the board. But until that portal closes and until we know what money we've got to talk about, we're kind of treading water, are we not? Until we get that information.
My understanding, the financials, that's our next step. Yes. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So did you say you're having a meeting on January 3rd with Mr. Hansick?
Yes.
And when do you expect to get the figures?
Well, I mean, the document that we do have is pretty close, but it's not finished. There are some questions that we have of how finance utilizes the New World system and keeping track of things that Ernst & Young wasn't able to determine. So I can't honestly tell you I know, but I would guess we're very close to it. So after that meeting, we should have, I would think maybe that day or the next day, that finished document.
So then if the next scheduled meeting is January 5th, you will have the numbers for. Why don't we do this? Have the meeting if you have the numbers, cancel the meeting if you don't.
That was my thought. You expressed it exactly. We have it on the calendar. We'll keep it there. But if we feel that we're not in a position to do anything at the January 5th meeting, then we can cancel that.
Okay, good.
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I was kind of raising my hand. I asked if Gary was going to be on for a while, and I should have just asked this question so he could get off when I asked if he was going to be on for a while. And I guess there's a couple of questions I have here. One is, what is the process once the portal is closed? Could you or could Gary explain to the committee what the process is and how we move forward with that then, just so everybody knows?
Yeah, because we do want to expedite the money going out. We had discussed a type of riverboat grant committee process, but that would require multiple meetings coming back, extending the timeline when checks would go out. So Gary, if you could just describe the sort of formulaic process that we determined would be the most expeditious.
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Sanchez. So the way that we have it currently contemplated is the application in this particular program is not a first come, first served program. By doing so, we will need to wait until all the applications have been submitted and have been approved by the committee before we can determine the amount that each of the successful applicants will be receiving. Excuse me. So currently, the application portal is open and is meant to come down on the 31st of January. And so and then there's also an appeals process that may go on for 2 weeks subsequent to that date, so into February 15th. And shortly thereafter, we think not only will we have the list of applicants that have been vetted and ready for the committee to discuss and potentially approve, but at that point, we'll also have the quantification of how much the committee may choose to recommend to fund each of the successful applicants. We've designed a quantification methodology that would address both an undersubscription and an oversubscription. Undersubscription being when there are less requests from applicants than a funding tranche. In that case, the current belief is that the recommendations to the committee would include funding up to the requested amounts and returning the unused amounts to the committee's broader purposes. In a scenario in which there's an oversubscription, meaning there are more requests than there are available fundings for that tranche of provider types, the current contemplation is each of the successful applicants will receive a pro rata reduction of their award amount. So as an example, if the particular tranche is overfunded by, let's say, 120%, that 20% would be pro rata applied and reducing each of the successful applicants so that the total funding that's available is the total amount that is dispersed to the applicants. And we believe, barring a scenario in which there's a high glut of applicants that are submitted on the deadline of January 31st, we believe that shortly after the February 15th appeals deadline, we'll be able to have conversations with the chair and potentially make those recommendations to the committee.
Madam Chair.
Just so I have clarification, did you just suggest that if it is oversubscribed, that all applicants will receive a portion of the 4 million? And what happens if there is a specific program need? And I'm talking in very general hypothetical terms right now, but if there's a very specific need for one of the not-for-profit applicants, that if that money is cut by 20, 30, who knows how much percentage if it's oversubscribed, that program will no longer be available into the capacity that is needed to make transformational change, which I had assumed that was going to be the value of this money, is that transformational change. It would water it down. And what if some of the applicants, although definitely worthy, may not be as worthy as other applicants? So what I'm hearing, if I am understanding what you said correctly, all applicants will be funded. All applicants will be funded as money is available to that group. So there is no judgment on the transformational value of any of those grant applications. Is that my understanding?
I think the intention was to expedite money going out to these organizations. So if the will of the committee is for the review process to be, again, similar to the Riverboat Grant Committee process, that would require, we can do that. It would require more time and meetings for us to go through and make those determinations on how much we would like to fund to each candidate in the event that we're oversubscribed. I think the most transformational component of the program was the mental health one, and that is a non-competitive grant. So that has a predetermined amount that would go to those big 6 organizations. But for the other aspects, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, I do believe we discussed in the event of oversubscription, using this formulaic model, there would be actually a minimum that everyone would receive of up to $25,000, and then the pro rata reduction for all applicants after that. But yeah, as a way to make it more objective and streamline the process, this is what we discussed. If it's the will of the committee that we perform more of a riverboat grant committee process, then we can certainly do that. Mr. Martin and then Mr. Shepro.
One possible way to address that consideration is, first off, to recognize that what you deem to be transformational on a group may not be what you know what I mean? It pushes us into the realm of individual judgments. And I don't know that it's totally out of line to say that, and it may sound harsh, but if you think through it, it's not totally off base. So I asked for $100,000. Instead, I'm going to get 80. Okay, because of this arbitrary cutoff, because we're going to make a proportional discount. Then it's my obligation to find $20,000 worth of that 20% at another source. And if I can find donations, if I can say that, they have a campaign, they say, we have available to us this amount of money, we need this amount of money from our donors to support us, which is why I think we were considering making certain that we had organizations applying that had substance to them, so that they have donor lists, so that they can go out and petition and say, we've got what effectively is a matching grant here of 80% of the cost of this $100,000 project. We need $20,000. I'm not saying that's what we ought to do. I'm just saying that there may be an option, but the real point is it's going to be difficult to have this conversation until we get the applications in. If we have applications that are double the amount of money that we've made available, then we've got to sit and have a meeting with ourselves and decide what we want to do. If we have 110%, that's a whole different deal. But I would feel, I don't want to have that participate in the conversation of determining, of dealing with it until we know what we've got people asking for.
Mhm.
And then maybe we pick categories, of if there's a million ways, or not a million, I hope. There's a few ways, I'm sure that we'll come up with, but let's find out first what the problem is before we try to cure it.
Mr. Shepro.
I guess a slightly different take. I agree it's more work, but I agree with Madam Chair's comments. And I think we saw evidence of this with CARES Act for particularly the fire district funding, which is, if to use Mr. Martin's example, you need 100,000 and you're afraid you only get 80, you're going to ask for 125,000 because you don't want to be stuck when there's a pro rata reduction. And so I think that actually saying you're going to do a pro rata is almost going to guarantee you're going to be oversubscribed, because I think it's sort of obvious that you don't want to be honest when everybody else is going to ask for too much, knowing you'll reduce it at the end of the road. And I mean, I like the idea in theory of saying, go out and raise the 20,000 yourself. But if you've got a particular project defined, that, and you don't get what you need, then what do we do? How much time do we give them the money, knowing that they don't have enough unless they manage to have a successful fundraising campaign? So I just think that may open up additional cans of worms that we don't want to have to get to.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 points. First of all, I think we do have to wait until all the applications are in, until they've been vetted. and the appeal process is over before we can decide which direction we're going to go in. So I think discussion about this at this point is wasted air on our part. We don't need to discuss it now. We need to find out where we're at. First of all, we've got to find out what the internal requests are that we're going to approve. Then we have to find out what the outside applicants for the 4 million are, get that appeal process done, and then make decisions on how we're going to handle it, if it's more or less. But to discuss it right now, we don't know. We have to wait until we have definitive numbers, and then we can look at it, whether it's more or less.
Madam Chair.
And I would agree with that. I was just asking for clarity,
Mhm.
just simple clarity and process.
Somebody should make a motion.
I'm sorry, I asked the question of the process.
Oh, it's good. It's relevant for us all to discuss. Again, the thinking was to make it more objective and streamlined, but if this committee would like to go through a different process, that's something we can discuss. So then.
You're not ruling that out. I think you're just saying,
Leave the option open,
yeah, instead of discussing it now.
not decide today on
Perfect.
what we want to do. Yeah. And depending on how the appeals process goes, or I should say, how many applicants get rejected and want to appeal, we're going to be following up with those rejections just to say, hey, what happened? Why do you think you were rejected? Do you plan on appealing that? It's very possible well before the closing of that appeal window, we'll have all of our numbers together. And so we can present the committee then, here is option A. If we're going to go formulaic, this is what it would look like. Or here's option B. We can go through more review process and have a few more meetings on that and then make that determination ourselves of where to cut applicants' awards. So, Mr. Phillips.
I'd like just to speak to the 80-20 Mr. Martin brought up, in that ARPA does allow for us as an administrative effort. If an applicant's percentage is determined to be lower than what they applied for, or if they are not do not meet the criteria, we may assist them in locating, and ARPA speaks to this, we may assist them in locating appropriate funding, and or ARPA, we may explore and will other sources of funding that we may utilize and research and find and make a functional vehicle by way of our administrative effort.
Mr. Leonard.
I would strongly suggest against that. I respect your opinion, but if we're going to start looking for other sources of funding for them, because we can't fully fund it, we're going to be doing this for years.
And I only state that because it's in the document.
Yeah.
It makes that so.
And I guess
For your information only.
my position on it, and I'm only one of 10, is we don't want to go down that road.
Well, and I want to apologize for making this sound like it was a negotiation or a thought. I agree. We need to know what we've got before we can sit and really have the conversation. So.
Okay. Mr. Shepro.
I'm guilty as anybody here, but it seems to me we're having a lengthy discussion about why we should not have a lengthy discussion.
Amen.
All right. Well, I think we have had quite a lengthy discussion and Christmas draws near. So unless there are any other questions or comments, Mr. Brown?
Just one more question. There's been a sense of frustration, I guess I could say, from a lot of the board members on this process and how long things have taken and such. And Gary, not to put you on the spot, but you and Ernst & Young have been on the payroll now for the last couple months. And I know you're doing a lot of work with other municipalities, counties and such. In your experience, are we dragging the ball here, or are we ahead, or how are we doing?
Mr. Brown, it's a great question, and I can offer you my perspective from what I'm seeing and hearing, not only from the clients that I'm interacting with, but also what my colleagues are interacting with. I think just it bears reference that the CARES Act was a different type of federal funding than the American Rescue Plan is. The CARES Act was considered other assistance, and as such did not require the same level of regulatory scrutiny that the fiscal recovery funds do. So the American Rescue Plan was designated by OMB as a grant. And as such, more of the federal regulations surrounding grants are applicable. So for example, the NOFA that we spent time documenting, talking through, aligns with the application. It aligns with the grant agreement that's still being worked on. So those things cannot move in singular fashion. They're all are interrelated. So because of the increased applications of federal regulations, the ARPA dollars are more challenging to program than the CARES Act funds. The other thing, Mr. Brown, that I'm seeing from other clients is the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that was passed. There's a significant amount of funds available to state and potentially local governments for infrastructure projects. So broadband, water, sewage, et cetera. So a number of counties, cities, and states are delaying their utilization of their fiscal recovery funds until clarity comes from the federal government about how those funds will be available to states and in some cases competitively to counties. Similarly, counties and cities are waiting for the states to announce how they will allocate their Infrastructure and Jobs Act funds should they receive those directly. So long-winded way of saying is it's a much longer process we're seeing for under the fiscal recovery plan than we did fiscal recovery funds, than we did for the coronavirus relief fund. As it relates to King County, and I promised that I would be as transparent as possible. From my perspective, we being King County are ahead of what I'm seeing from other counties, cities, and states. We saw a number of recovery plans that had zeros across the board. And from those that I've talked to and spoken with, there's a lot of zeros that are going on now. So I think not only the vaccination sites, also some of the other use of the funds, including the community support grants, is sort of leading the way for what I've seen from other counties and cities.
I have a question precipitated by these comments. If we spend money for one of our county programs and later on federal money becomes available, will we be allowed to seek reimbursement, or is that horse going to be out of the barn?
Don't know. Gary, do you know?
Yeah, I can offer my thoughts. It depends on the federal program, and it depends if you've reported to the federal government the use of your funds. So the majority, if not all, of the funding that's come out from the federal government has an anti-duplication of benefit clause. So it says if that expense has been reimbursed by another federal source, it's not eligible for reimbursement from another federal source. So at that point in time, timing becomes imperative, as well as when you report and what you report to the different federal fund sources.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Bates?
I would like to congratulate the chairman of this committee and Peter Phillips and Ernst & Young on the successful launching of our portal today. This is an exciting moment for us, and thank you for all of your hard work, and I can't wait to see all of these great requests coming in. I think it's going to be exciting, and thank you for getting this milestone done for us before the holidays. It's a good Christmas present. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bates. Any other questions or comments before we adjourn? Hearing and seeing none. Oh, no new business, no old business, no need for executive session. Mr. Kenyon?
Let's adjourn. I move we adjourn and face the sun.
Face the sun. Mr. Frost seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Merry Christmas, everyone.